Welcome to The Screen Queen, the show where I'll be talking about your favorite show or your favorite movie. You'll just have to find out what you're about to know. This is your Screen Queen, your host, Samantha Parrish. I find it kind of ironic considering the last episode I talked about the movie Creepshow, and there's a story called The Crate that had to deal with older people being the center point for the story. And now here's Courage the Cowardly Dog, where the creators basically said, "Hold my beer, I'm about to make these old people have problems worse than their arthritis." Hello there and welcome back to the show. My name is Samantha Parrish, and as always, I am your host on The Screen Queen. This is the show that does bring the scares that care. And I'm literally bringing that to you because this is a show that literally has scares that care. I'm not gonna lie, I've been looking forward to talking about Courage the Cowardly Dog for quite some time because it is one of my favorite animated shows of all time, and that's a hard list to get on. The fact that this purple dog has a placement on that list, that's a very high compliment because of how much I love animation. I had to think about Courage the Cowardly Dog in a way that I never had to before, because I think about Courage the Cowardly Dog when I was watching the show as a little girl, and then having to watch it as an adult, and comparing that with the information and seeing if that went totally past me as a kid. And keep in mind, I'm a scaredy cat, flat out. I don't like bugs, ghosts kind of freak me out, demons kind of freak me out. There's a lot of things that freak me out, and yet horror is one of my favorite genres. Duh. How about that? I'm out of luck. But the one thing I love about horror is how it intrigues me, and I don't think I realized that this was one of the shows that inadvertently became one of the very things that got me to appreciate horror because of what it could bring. How could the character get through this tumultuous situation? And I don't think I really saw the fact that this was a show that is a scary show. Yet it doesn't really come off as a scary show. This is a show that is the introduction of horror for children, and yet it never really felt that it was too terrifying. This was a show that knew how to play its cards just right, in a way that, yes, you are alarmed by what you're watching, but you're also entertained by what you're watching. This was a show that was similar in the way that Beetlejuice executed its premise of having comedy and horror mixed together. One never felt that it outweighed the other, and when you watch Courage the Cowardly Dog, all the humorous things that Courage says, all the humorous ways that he gets out of these horrendous ordeals, it has an excellent payoff. And there's something that I forgot, that I actually learned later on when I became a movie buff, is the Don Bluth rule. And if you don't know what the Don Bluth rule is, I'm going to go ahead and tell it to you because it's going to make a lot of sense about Courage the Cowardly Dog and why it got away with so much horrifying stuff. Don Bluth said, "As long as you have a happy ending, you can get away with showing anything you want to kids." Looking at Courage the Cowardly Dog, you got spiders. You got terrifying mermaid queens. You have alien birds. You got bad doctor birds. You got creepy barbers. You got demons and mattresses. This show got away with everything. And it's fantastic for that. This was like a fun way to be able to watch something scary, and yet you weren't going to have to sleep with the lights on because you knew that there was going to be a happy ending. That even though your main character is terrified, he's going to save the day. And strangely, that is kind of comforting. As much as I was like one of the many kids that loved watching the superheroes or any character that found their courage to come and get through the horrible ordeal and save their loved ones and save the day, you didn't really have a character like Courage that was terrified the entire time, which strangely, that is kind of comforting that you're watching a character that would do the same actions, that not everyone is going to be very brave going through the ordeal, ironic considering what his name is. When I think about Courage, I also had to think about its placement on the timeline of animation. That this was one of the first shows that Cartoon Network had that presented an edge. Which sounds kind of strange to say, and as mentioned before, this was a show that got away with everything because of the Don Bluth rule, But this was a show that wasn't like the others on Cartoon Network. This wasn't like Ed, Ed and Eddie, and this wasn't like the Powerpuff Girls. This was an entirely different atmosphere to bring to children. You were in a neighborhood. You weren't in a town. You were in the middle of nowhere, quite literally, because that was the setting of the show. We know, now that I think about it, I love how simple that show is for saying things like middle of nowhere and things that were very on point, on par. Anyway, back to my point. This was a show that did something different while also being simple at the same time. There was a lot of detail that went into certain shows like Ed, Ed and Eddie and the Powerpuff Girls and even some of the new like Looney Tunes that came out. And then you had Courage, that was something that you really wouldn't peg to be a show on Cartoon Network. And then after it found its footing, it did become a show on Cartoon Network. This was like a good addition to Cartoon Network to have something that was kind of like a palate cleanser. You had something that was a bit more adult, but you also didn't feel like you were scarred by it. This show knew exactly what it was doing, and I love it for that. There's something that I thought about with Courage the Cowardly Dog that I wanted to share is this was kind of like a hole-in-the-wall show. This had many actors and animators that they weren't really prominent in other projects, and as a movie buff, I wanted to know, like, well, did any of the cast do something before this show or after this show? And honestly, they didn't do much, and I was kind of surprised. This was the only main show that John R. Dilworth did, who is the creator of Courage the Cowardly Dog. He still did many other animated stuff, but nothing hit like Courage the Cowardly Dog did in more ways than just being a global phenomenon. He just did whatever he wanted to do, is really what it comes down to. And many of the voice actors, they were not known actors. They were just kind of there. That's just the best way to put it. A lot of them wanted a gig to do, and they figured, hey, why not? Because a lot of the actors were older actors, and as a weird little side bit to share, the character Eustace, his voice actor, had to be replaced halfway during the second or third season. I don't quite remember when it was that the original voice actor for Eustace died, and then they had to find an immediate replacement, and I can't even tell the difference, to be honest, and I've seen the show a lot. That just shows you how great that actor really was to replace the former actor that played Eustace. But not only that, there were a few other prolific actors. As the show began to get traction, then we finally got some people that wanted to partake in Courage the Cowardly Dog. This was like one of those shows that it had to be out for a little while, more than just the first episode. It's kind of like, what's the best way to put Courage the Cowardly Dog? It's sort of like a one-hit wonder. Like, okay, it's going to get out there, but it's going to take a while before it really gets a lot of phenomenon. Courage the Cowardly Dog was kind of like the B-side under a record. Like, people had to see what the A-side was and see the other shows before they made their way to Courage the Cowardly Dog. And when they did, a lot of people wanted to partake in this show. But the specific people that I found that worked on this show, there were people that were like the high ballers of animation. These were like at the end of the first season, which was the episode, where is it on my little list here? I knew I had it. Oh, here it is. The Great Fusellini, which was an episode that, I didn't really care for it too much. The whole Peppa thing did nothing for me. And I had no idea that there was literal Hollywood gold in that episode. I don't know if my listeners are familiar with the name Jim Cummings, but I'll go ahead and give a few things that he did. Winnie the Pooh. He was also a couple of voices in Aladdin. I believe he was the big security guy that kept chasing Aladdin for bread. I think that was him. And then he was also the, what was his name? I'm drawing a blank. He works a lot in Disney. Ray from The Princess and the Frog. I really had to, scratch my head for that one. And also, just a little bit other things, he was the singing voice for Jeremy Irons in The Lion King. When Jeremy Irons' voice broke out, that guy came in to save the day. So when you listen to Be Prepared, that's Jim Cummings. And when you also listen to In the Dark of the Night from Anastasia, that singing voice, also Jim Cummings. Now that you know who he is, now you know the big damn deal that it was that he got involved with Courage the Cowardly Dog. He brought the thunder. It really makes me think differently about that episode, knowing that he's the guy that plays the creepy theater alligator that is in that episode. But then I also had to think of it in the whole grand scheme of things for them. This had to have been amazing for the whole team that they got someone from Hollywood to come out to them. They were kind of like a hole-in-the-wall show, just chilling out and doing their things and hoping to God they didn't get a phone call they scared it in too badly. They finally got someplace that they were getting the people they wanted to come to that show. And as a creator, that is an amazing feeling to have the people that you want to come and collaborate and contribute to your show. There was a lot of work that went into Courage the Cowardly Dog, and a lot of that work had to pay off. But there was a lot more work that went in there that the payoff had to be the time of when the adults who watched the show as a kid would catch on to some of the references. And this show definitely had a lot of adult references, and I'm not talking about the mature references, it's the cinema references. This was a show that had a lot of cinema culture into it, which says a lot. This was a show that you didn't know that it was a reference. You had to do the homework to find out that it was a reference. One of the episodes that comes to mind is Demon in the Mattress. When I watched this as a little girl, I was like, okay, it's a demon in a mattress, and the demon is in Muriel, and Courage is going to save the day. It didn't really do anything for me as a kid, but when I found out what the episode was really about, it changed the way that I looked at it. No matter how many times I watch that episode, it never ceases to amaze me that the entirety of that episode is a parody and also the first horror homage to The Exorcist. Now, to those out there that haven't seen The Exorcist, it is a movie about a little girl that gets possessed by the devil, a demon. I don't really remember, to be honest, but she's definitely possessed by evil, and it's up to 2 priests to get the evil exorcised out of her. It's a classic, it's controversial. That's a hell of a film to introduce to kids, man. But I love the way they went around this. And when I looked at how they did a parody of The Exorcist, they only chose the few key core elements that were iconic a part of The Exorcist, with the green puke, the head turning around, making a huge 360 wheel of absolute terror that terrorized a nation, and the frost all in the room to indicate the coldness. Those are the main ingredients, a part of The Exorcist that people remember. So with all those key elements, it's able to correctly convey into a cartoon that people are going to get that reference, or people are going to get that reference when they're older. It's kind of like 2 birds with 1 bird feeder. Either way, there's going to be the outcome that someone is going to appreciate that reference. It might take time, but I can definitely understand how much fun that the creators had to be able to present a classic film, but I also respect and appreciate how they were able to do this episode. It makes me wonder what the pitch was like back then when they were going to do this episode. Like, hey, let's do an episode entirely homaging The Exorcist. And I'm sure the crew was like, I don't know if that's possible. There's way too much going on in there. But choosing those core elements, it does make it fun. In a weird way, it does make The Exorcist very funny. There's another episode that ironically took the simpler approach to get a reference put out there. And it's one of those that has lived on in time. No matter who I'm talking to, if Courage the Cowardly Dog comes up, the first thing they say is, what's the episode where Quentin Tarantino is mentioned? And it's the episode Everyone Wants to Direct. When I rewatched that episode, I had to skip it the first time because I was just howling with laughter. I could not get through the episode without laughing because of experiencing that episode, knowing they referenced Quentin Tarantino and renaming him Benton Tarantella. And to my knowledge, I believe it's still unclear if Quentin Tarantino is aware that Courage the Cowardly Dog made a reference to his name in the episode. And that's something to think about how much humor they put into the first season of the show, and it was something that I didn't really notice until after I did the research and the trivia and really analyzing the writing. And I have to appreciate this show for how it went above and beyond. How else would this show be able to introduce horror without having a major amount of comedy added to it? I mean, there are some things like Beetlejuice or Creepshow, or what's like another good one? Tales from the Crypt, that applied humor, but they usually wanted to scare somebody. This was a show that I can remember as a kid, and I never once got scared. And this is someone that has deep arachnophobia, and the first episode had everything to do with every ick factor of spider that there could be. That shows you something. And then going into the second season, there was something that I noticed that I'm not quite sure if anyone else has noticed, that the tone of the show changed in the second season. By all means, Courage the Cowardly Dog still upholds its comedy and horror hand in hand in a beautiful, ballistic balance. But this show made more room for heartfelt moments. It kind of eased up on some of the scary stuff to have a lot more sensitivity. When I look back at the cartoon shows that I watched as a little girl, I do remember a lot of the heartfelt moments on many of the shows that I watched, like Powerpuff Girls, Ed, Edd and Eddy. Even some of the Looney Tunes cartoons fit in a heartfelt moment. But I remembered Courage the Cowardly Dog had a lot more effort put into those heartfelt moments. That this just wasn't a moment where you're supposed to empathize with the character. It was a moment that you empathized with, but then you also had to process their emotions. There are some things with sadness acclimated into a animated show, but you kind of analyze it to know, okay, they're sad, but then it's quickly resolved in like seconds. You really had to sit with courage when all of these sad things happen. It wasn't fixed. There are sometimes you have a sad moment that can't be fixed, and you just have to sit with it, or you don't know what to do, and you have to sit with it. That show encapsulated on that exact feeling. As with any show, when the second season comes out, how is the second season gonna top the first season? In all honesty, I think the second season tops all 4 seasons. There was more danger, there was more vibrancy, there was a lot more thrills and chills, but as mentioned, there's a lot more heartfelt moments that does make this show the strongest. The other 2 seasons, yeah, I like them, but they weren't as strong in all of those various elements of storytelling than what happened in the second season. When I was rewatching the second season, this was something that I noticed, and I really want to share to see if anyone else has noticed this, and if you haven't watched the show for a while, then maybe keep this in mind when you rewatch it, because I can't get it out of my mind. So I want to start out by talking with the first episode of the second season, which is the Magic Tree of Nowhere. And as a side note, that's my favorite episode in the entire series of Courage the Cowardly Dog. It's the episode that I've always remembered, and it is one of the reasons why I've always remembered the show, but not for the fact of its entertainment, but something that I took away from it that still resonates throughout all of my memories of childhood. So, if it's been a while since you've seen Courage the Cowardly Dog, I will give a synopsis. The Magic Tree of Nowhere is an episode where the barren terrain of the farmland finally gets some good luck when a magic seed is planted and it grows into a wishing tree, and it's the first good thing that's happened on the farm. Looking at the entirety of that episode, that's the first good thing that has happened on the farm. We haven't seen any good things happen to all of these characters, so this is the fortune they needed. But naturally, there is no such thing as good things, and Eustace is planning on chopping the tree down. He doesn't like how good it's bringing to Muriel and Courage. This is also a major development for Courage's character. What we've seen in the first season is that Courage will go above and beyond and bend time and space and do God knows what he can in his tiny little dog body to save Muriel and sometimes Eustace. But now the motive has changed for it not being, oh, someone's in danger because of a monster. This is something the good that's needed and needs to be protected at all costs. This was a very different protection that Courage gives. And Courage goes above and beyond, but unfortunately, the tree is chopped down. That moment still gets to me, no matter how old I get. When Courage goes and screams out his frustration and comes back to the tree, we see him fall to his knees and cry. That's the first emotional moment that we've ever seen happen to Courage, and this is one of those moments where you just have to sit with the character. There has been other characters we've seen in numerous shows, like Powerpuff Girls, Spider-Man, Batman, Superman, where they've all failed. Except the difference is that all those characters have powers. Courage doesn't really have powers. He did everything he could, and that is a relatable factor, that no matter how strong we are, we can do everything we can, and sometimes we will still fail. It's a humane moment to see in this show, and it's encapsulated in that episode. No matter how many times I watch it, I'm still going to sit there and I'm like, fucking purple dog made me cry. It still affected me the way I was when I was a little girl. It still gets to me now. I still remember that feeling watching it and understanding the theme that sometimes you will fail in life. Sometimes you will lose. But it's how you move on afterwards. How do you carry on that legacy? How do you carry on the memory? And I do like the wrap-up for the episode. They end up seeing a new rose coming in through the tree, that just because you lost something does not mean it's forgotten. That doesn't mean that the memories are gone, that the impact wasn't lost. It's a good lesson. But keeping that episode in mind, this does seem like the perfect episode to begin on, but this was also indicated in the opening credits. I noticed something in the opening credits for the second season. If you pay attention and you go back through it, it starts out with the Magic Tree of Nowhere, and then the last slide on that TV screen is the character from the episode The Tower of Doctors Are Lost. Which brings my next point. How the show ended in the second season with a whole entire episode. I remember watching this episode, and it rocked my world as a kid to see something that wasn't two separate stories in one episode, but we got the continuation of one whole story. And they really needed this story to be elaborated more than just the regular 11-minute story that you get. I remember watching this, and that was kind of a big deal. I don't know if anyone else has noticed this as a kid, where you kind of get this this time frame in your head where you know that you've gotten enough time for an 11-minute episode to stretch up for 30 minutes. And then seeing this episode go on, it kind of felt like a theatrical experience. Like, oh, I get more about this story. This is interesting. And The Tower of Doctors Are Lost is one of the most important episodes we've ever had in television history. And I'm not saying that because I love the show. But looking at the themes that it covered in this episode, this is something that needs to be shown to a lot of other kids. It has the perfect example of what depression looks like. There are a lot of people that have looked at this episode very intently, and they see that this is more than just an episode about a guy firing off sad bombs. There was this example of what it's like to go through depression. I remember watching this as a kid, and I could understand the themes of it, and I rewatched it as an adult, and I still understood it the same way I did when I was a little girl, that it's a depressed character. It just goes to show you how well the writing was in this episode to tackle something heavy, that it wasn't gonna mess up some child. It was going to teach them something that they did not know before, and this show taught kids certain things in a very simple and sensitive way. It is more than just a horror show. That's why I love it so much. It taught me more than I think I ever learned in the frickin' classroom. But then again, that's how all best lessons are learned, is the way that it's taught by someone else. And how you understand that lesson and carry it on. When I was doing my research into the episode of The Tower of Doctors Are Lost, I had a feeling that there was something behind the antagonist's name. Okay, why did they name him Zalost? And I thought maybe it's a context clue and it's the word lost and Zalost, and they just used the word lost and put something around it. Turns out I was wrong. Zalost is a Croatian term for sadness. This show has a lot of intelligence to it. It is more than just an anthropomorphic purple dog being scared out of his wits to go save the elderly. That rocked my mind. I love the fact that there's so much in this show that you think you know, and then you do the homework and see all these pieces coming together, and there's more than what was expected. This really is a show that is quite educational for what themes it brings, and some of the cultural aspects to the show as well. Really is an educational show. We should probably have this retermed that it's entertainment and education. But not only is this an episode where you have a depiction of depression, but it's also a whole conglomeration of many people we've seen on the show. In a way, it kind of feels like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where you can spot out certain characters and know where you've seen them before. In the very first few seconds of the episode, you do see familiar characters. There's a woman with these long big braids that is the girl that Freaky Fred used to be with, and then there is the burglar from one of the other episodes. You can look at this and remember all these different characters because there aren't really a lot of main characters on this show, but they're memorable enough to be shown in this episode and remember what episode they're from. It's pretty smart. It's like a nice little mishmash of different characters and getting to remember. It's kind of like a recap in a certain way. I love that there are many examples of depression in this episode. We have Dr. Zalost, who has tried to fill the hole in his soul with money and power and trying to hug his little mean rat thing sidekick. That doesn't do anything. And as someone who has dealt with depression, what works for someone else won't work for that person. That's something that I've had to teach myself and to also remember with others that suffer with depression. But there's also other examples that, this show did such a great job with depression. When the character Muriel gets hit with one of the sad bombs and she is miserable. And I like that representation of depression right there about what happens when you're so depressed that you can't even move. You can't even talk. And even Eustace, as a crummy old man that he is like, hey, okay, we gotta get you feeling better. Even though Eustace is literally a bag of crap, embodiment in human form, he does get worried for his wife, and that's nice. Even the people that don't really think the world of you, they're still gonna be like, hey, can I do something? You never know what human nature is capable of, what will surprise us about certain people. There's so much that I could go into about this episode, and that's just a few of the things that come to mind. But I want to go ahead and wrap up this episode by talking about the last 2 seasons. Honestly, I didn't think much of seasons 3 and 4. I felt like the direction of the show got too cruel. Now, even though Courage goes above and beyond and he has been through the ringer, I don't know if anyone else has noticed this or they felt this way when they saw the show as a kid, that it just got too mean. There were episodes I remembered where Courage was replaced by a robot and had to do this gladiator style thing, and I remember that being too cruel to Courage. There was another episode about this cat that was trying to get her best friend Bunny back, and that was another cruel episode. They just kind of went a little too extreme. except for the last two episodes that I never had a problem with. I felt like that was a nice little end cap for the show. In the final two episodes, there's an episode that dives into Courage's origins. Even though some people probably didn't think much of the show at the time, but when you really look at it, it does go back to the origin of the character that we don't really know too much about. Even though the opening of the show says abandoned as a pup, there was an episode that never really got around to that in all four seasons of the show until the last two episodes of the four seasons that we actually got that story answered. That we actually got the story about what happened to Courage's parents. And it's heartbreaking. I can't watch that episode because it never fails to make me cry. It shatters your soul about, like, what will happen to your family. Oh, I can't even... See? I'm getting mistied and my voice is breaking. Even the thought about commentating on it, like, makes me sad. But then again, that's something to show for the writing, for how powerful it was to see something so heartbreaking and emotional. Like, really. I've said it so many times in this episode, but it really is an emotional show. It needs to get a lot more credit for how it really dives into emotions. And then there was the final episode, called Perfect, that people were kind of divided about. Again, it's a cruel episode, but it never failed in its message. Courage is not a perfect dog, and there are people in life that will ridicule you. You could have 10 questions, get 9 of them right, but someone's going to point out that one thing you didn't get right in those 10 problems, and in that episode, no matter what Courage did, even though he did what he was supposed to do and did it differently, it wasn't the way he was supposed to do it. And that made a problem, and it just... it took a toll on his soul. I've been through that where I'll be just spiraling because of how someone will ridicule me for what I did wrong or constantly point out what I did wrong. It really does take a toll on someone. And if you felt that way... you're perfect, and don't let anyone else ever tell you that you're not, okay? Even if it's some podcaster on here, you are perfect. I felt like it was a nice bookend for the show. No monsters, just a life lesson that you are who you are. You have to be who you want to be. That you're perfect in your own way. And what a better way to have that set on a show that does dive into those themes. It kind of came back to what Season 2 was doing by diving into certain themes where you had to sit with the character and figure out how that made you feel. It really is a therapeutic show in a strange way. But the thing that I want to end on with this show is a quote that I think about daily. And it's helped me immensely as an author. John R. Dilworth has always been approached about certain hypotheses for the show. There are fans that come up and one of them said, so Courage is in purgatory, right? And that's why there's monsters and why they're in nowhere and why they don't age and why nothing changes. And he'll say, you are right. And then another person approaches and their theory is that everything is in Courage's head. And that all the monsters that we see is exaggerated in his head because his caretakers are so elderly that they can't take him out. So this is his observation of what he feels is dangerous or what he sees as dangerous because of people he doesn't know. Which does make a lot of sense for the fact that dogs can be so scared when they see someone they don't know because they don't get out much. It makes a lot of sense. And John R. Dilworth says, you are right. And he'll always say, I tell everyone they're right because art has no wrong answer. And I just love that. It's a wonderful thing for a creator to hear, knowing they could make anything and someone will have an interpretation and they won't be wrong about that interpretation. Courage the Cowardly Dog really is one of the best shows that we have ever gotten in animation history. There's so much about this show that, again, makes it more than just a horror show. And I find that kind of funny considering I'm supposed to be talking about the scary stuff for this show, and yet I couldn't. Everything I remembered about this show was how much I did love those heartfelt moments. And yes, I'll admit that I do like the way they created the monsters and that you got to see all these different elements, But that's the thing. You got different elements to this show that made it more than just a horror show. You can watch it for however you want to. You can watch it for the horror. You can watch it for the humor. You can watch it for the heart. Because as John R. Dilworth said, there is no wrong answer here. Alright. Whew. TV shows take a toll on me. I'm going to do this for the show, but this was nice to be able to talk about my favorite animated show. This was fantastic. Alright, now is the time to find out what the next episode is going to be on The Screen Queen. If you are new to the show, I have a raffle system. I put a whole bunch of random selections in a box, and I mix it up really good, and I found out what the next episode's going to be, so we all find out together. Let me just get it mixed up real good. Here we go. Oh, I got a long one. I can smell it. Don't ask me how I can smell it. Oh! I knew it. I knew it. It was bound to happen one way or another. Okay, here we go. Well, it's about time I rewatched it anyway. The next episode of The Screen Queen is going to be The Silence of the Lambs. Oh my god, I can hear them screaming already. Whew, that's gonna be a heavy episode. Just, I can feel it. Oh, this tiny piece of paper has a lot of weight to it. Whew, okay. Well, that makes a wrap on this episode. Thank you so much for listening. If you would like to see more sneak peeks, or if you have any questions, or just want to say hi, I have made an Instagram for this show. Look up Queen of the Screen on Instagram, and that's where you'll find me. Alrighty. You all take care, and stay amazing, and don't forget, you are perfect. And stay courageous, okay? It's a scary season. It's very spooky. You might need a lot of courage in this season. Okay. You all take care. Bye-bye.